My name is Rita Kakati-Shah. I'm your host for the Uma Show. Welcome to your one-stop journey for feeling empowered. We are a platform for change. We build confidence. We are your voice. We want you to be bold, be you, be Uma. Today, we're exploring role models in TV and film, and I'm so excited to be joined by a goddess of go-getting, Swati Thiyagarajan, who is a conservation journalist, author, filmmaker, and storyteller in South Africa. Welcome, Swati.
Lovely. It's lovely to be here. Thank you. Thank you, Rita.
Of course. So you're Tamil, born in Chennai, to quite a well-to-do family who loved animals and nature. Tell us a little bit about your childhood and your upbringing.
Yeah, I'm Tamil. I grew up in Chennai. That's where I spent my childhood. I was very lucky. My father was very into nature. And also, he went to a school that's a J. Krishnamurti school. So he was very influenced by the Krishnamurti philosophy. And my father's best friend, Siddharth Butch, who was an ornithologist, became sort of my nature mentor. So he would take me every weekend from when I was about 4 or 5 into the local forest there, the Theosophical Society, which is this big forest on the banks of the Adyar River that goes all the way down to the beach. And it was on this beach, actually, that Annie Besant actually spotted and saw and met Krishnamurti for the first time. And I went to a Krishnamurti school as well, Rishi Valley. But the time that I spent with Uncle Siddharth in nature, for almost a decade, every weekend, we'd be out either on the beach or in the forest or near the marshes, and where he basically taught me deep respect for nature and the wild. He taught me that was my actual home. It's where I belonged. He taught me so much about how to be in nature, how to respect it, how to recognize what was happening around me, to see it as part of myself, not as me as something separate from it, because we're all part of the natural world. And those weekends were amazingly grounding for me. And still today, nature is my happy place, because that's really where I grew up.
Oh, I love that. What a powerful message, especially from such a young age as well. That's amazing. And I guess you've always had a way with animals, almost, I guess, a secret way of communicating with them. Could you share some examples of animals that you communicated with?
It's hard to classify in a very specific way, but initially, so when I was a child, when you're a child, you have no barriers between you, your imagination, what you're seeing, what you're perceiving, what you see as reality around you. So at that time when I was a child, when Siddharth uncle would tell me, for example, one of the things he would make me do regularly was to go hug the old trees in the forest. And he would say, if I hugged the tree and I pressed my ear up against its trunk, I would feel the living being that tree was, that sentience, because most of those trees were hundreds of years older than I was. And he spoke about how they would have stood the test of time, and they were witness to things that happened before I came along, and would stand witness to things that would happen after I became ashes and dust and, part of the earth. And that was a very profound feeling of connection for me, that continuity, that life goes on no matter what. And the other thing that was he would always tell me was how, this is what was very interesting for me. So in Hindu tradition, when we die, we're cremated. So he say, when you're cremated, if they collected all of your ash and whatever was left of you, he's like, you'd be like in a jar and you're worth nothing. Maybe, a little bit, like you're really literally like worth nothing, you're just ashes. But he's like, when this tree dies, it will either become a diamond or it will become all that oil and coal and gas that we extract from the ground, which means it's worth its value in millions. But that's just to show how we see ourselves as so superior and so valuable and so important, when nature, in its foundation, is so much more than what we are. So in that kind of surrounding, I grew up very much understanding that nature has a very deep sentience. So because of that, you then tend to respect all of the life around you, and you tend to understand that animals, even if you may see them as species, are ultimately individuals, and they may have their own way of being, adapting, reacting in a situation. So I've had moments when, if I've spent enough time in an ecosystem, or if I've spent enough time with an animal, through its behavior, through what I can see it doing or not doing, through the way it would react to me or not. And it's an instinct you develop for that. You have a basic communication going there. So which means you then project your non-threatening position there. You're trying not to stress it out. You're trying not to freak it out. You're trying not to scare it away or make it so scared that it might attack. So you're projecting all of that to the animal, and the animal is sort of totally getting that, because they can read your electrical impulses and they can read your energy. And then later on, of course, when I did a lot more research and I made a film called The Animal Communicator on a woman, Anna Breitenbach, who can communicate with animals, it became so much clearer to me just how far you can take that communication if you work at it, you know. And I think that's really it. These are skills. If you talk to indigenous peoples, they will speak very freely about how they communicate with nature. It is because that is something that they do every day. So it is something that we all have inherently as the human animal. We are capable of doing it. It's just how often or how much we do it. And I've always felt when I've gone out to do my wildlife show and I've spent time in the Indian jungle, often I have felt that I have gotten shots or videos, or I've gotten material I require for my show, simply because I have created a certain intention and I've put that energy out there, and I've asked for a certain, not a response from nature. And I've always felt that there's been that reciprocity, and that's what I call, that's how I see the communication.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that, because you're right, it's such a powerful message and bond that we naturally have. And it's really the environment that we are in and how much we choose to exercise that love that we naturally have by virtue of just being humans, I guess. I love that. So actually going to some of your shows now, you've actually worked at NDTV for over 23 years, starting as a reporter, working your way up through the ranks, becoming senior special correspondent, then the environment editor. And then you started your own TV show with an all-woman crew, Born Wild. Tell us about that.
So I was very lucky that at NDTV, my bosses, Prannoy and Radhika, are very committed and very concerned about the environment. So unlike a lot of private television channels, they were very keen to promote environment reporting. So I was very lucky that that happened. And so I got all these opportunities to do so. So I started with a lot of environment reporting. So that was daily news reporting that I did. While I was doing that, I just felt that the news very much focuses on a headline or something that's happened, and we're trying to bring in immediate news to the audience. And I thought to myself, how could I take a story and go into it in more detail and give the audience a better picture, a bigger picture of what is happening, as opposed to just 2 lines of saying an elephant died here, or a tiger was caught there, or a road is being built here. How do I put this all into context for them so they can see it in the bigger picture? So then I started Born Wild, my show, and I had a lot of encouragement from Prannoy and Radhika to do it. So it was the first of its kind, longest running sort of half-hour environment show on a news channel. And then my crew, as I said, I had Gargi, my colleague, Gargi Rawat, and I had Mandakini Malla, my camera person, and me. So there was just 3 of us women, and we would travel all over India into all of the wild places. And looking back on it now and looking at the history of a lot of wildlife documentaries, we were sort of the first all-women crew in the wild. There hasn't been an all-women. Now there are many. But at the time, and I'm talking about a while ago, this was almost, I'm talking about 2003 or so, we were the first sort of all-women crew in the wild. We traveled across the length and breadth of India, you know, from all the way from the Himalayas to the Sundarbans to the Rann of Kutch, down south. We went everywhere. We looked at ecosystems, we looked at species, we looked at indigenous peoples. We looked at issues. We looked at what were the laws that were being broken, what were the laws that were being followed, what more needed to be done. So really looking at wildlife and conservation from a very holistic point of view of ecosystems, species, where were we at, what was happening, what needed to be done, who were the wonderful people on the ground working hard to protect, to study, to make other people aware. So it was, we looked at all of this, and I call my show Born Wild because I believe that, as I've said this before, we're all human animals. So when we're born, when that baby is born, and it doesn't matter if you're born in a fancy hospital or even if it's a cesarean through which you're born, when you are born, you're completely raw and wild. You're as raw and wild as a puppy or a kitten or a tiger cub or a lion cub, anything that is born. So I believe we're all born wild, and it's life that ends up sort of taming us down, if you will, or domesticating us.
I love her, and especially hearing the background of the naming. I love that. It's amazing. And not just that, you've also researched, produced, managed, and basically spearheaded multiple other TV shows as well. Save Our Tigers, The Greenathon, Clean India Campaign, Wild Walk, The Animal Communicator. Incredible. Tell us a little bit about those as well.
Yeah, so Born Wild was the show that I did, and that was really my baby in many ways.
Right.
But then NDTV started this sort of a department called Special Campaigns. We started Special Campaigns, and under special projects, really, we work on various campaigns. So whenever we had a campaign that fell under the umbrella of environment, then I got involved as the content editor. We had wonderful people doing the production side, and we had people doing the design side, and we had wonderful senior anchors presenting as well. But I sort of became the content editor. Fantastic people collecting stories and all of it, but I'd work with them to get the content right. So we did Save Our Tigers for almost 3 or 4 years.
Wow.
That was very, very successful. We still get quoted, and we still get asked by people why we're not doing that anymore. We did the Greenathon, which was a huge climate change awareness campaign, where we were one of the first channels to really speak about and look at climate change in detail before it's now become headline news everywhere. The longest running campaign we've been doing is the Clean India campaign, Banega Swachh India we started with, and now we've transitioned into Banega Swasth India. So we're looking at how cleanliness needs to health, and how do we as a nation maintain and keep long-term health. So that's the campaign I've been working on for a while now. Again, as a part of the content editing team, we have a fantastic team who handles all the other aspects. And yeah, so these are some of the special campaigns that I've been involved with. And all of these campaigns work on television through the year. So we do special stories, reports, half hours, all of it, but it always culminates in a big telethon. And this was also quite new for Indian television, or probably television anywhere in the world, where we would start the program at 9 o'clock in the morning, and we continue until 9 o'clock at night. So for 12 hours live, with a celebrity anchor, invariably Mr. Amitabh Bachchan. We go through, the entire gamut of all of the material that needs to be covered under all of these various banners of the campaign. And essentially, again, it was to raise awareness. Through Save Our Tigers, we raised a lot of money, over $1 million, to give our forest guards in order to be able to protect tigers. Through the Greenathon, we raised, again, millions of dollars, and we gave villages in India that didn't have electricity. We provided them with solar lanterns, schools with solar lanterns and solar electricity. And of course, with the Clean India and the Health India campaign, we're not raising money directly. What we're trying to do is bring awareness to why this is such a key and crucial issue. So these are the other projects. So now I'm not a full-time employee anymore with NDTV. I am now a consulting editor. So I just come on for their special projects.
Absolutely, yeah. And also Amazon Prime actually is airing Animal Communicator currently as well, isn't it? So that's quite nice on you.
Yeah, in the US, Amazon Prime in the US is airing it. Yeah.
Perfect, yeah. So you've also written a couple of books, Born Wild, Journeys into the Wild Hearts of India and Africa being one of them. Tell us a little bit about that, because this is now the crossing over into Africa as well.
Yeah, so in 2008, I moved to Africa when I met Craig, and then I moved here to Cape Town. And I continued traveling back to India to do my work, but then I also sort of did some reporting and conservation work here in South Africa. So when I started doing that, it was very interesting for me, because on the ground, I saw some similarities, a lot of differences. Policies are different, attitudes are different, certain ways of dealing with wildlife is quite different, but then in some ways very similar. So I found that quite fascinating. So by then I'd done Born Wild for almost 14 years. So I thought it was worth putting my experiences down in a book. So maybe it would read as a story and it could get to more people. So then I wrote a book. It was it's a personal book on my personal journeys, and what I saw on the ground when I was reporting. So it's very much to do with what I saw, what I experienced, what I learned, the wonderful people who taught me, what they had to say. And then I sort of, every chapter brings in a little bit of India and a little bit of Africa, just so that you could compare and contrast what was happening in both countries. And that hadn't been done before, to bring in both countries into one chapter and look at it from that perspective. So it was a lot of fun for me to do, because it was, writing is a whole different skill. So when you write for television, right? And I've been writing so many scripts and everything, and I thought, oh yeah, I can do this. I can write a book. Like I've been writing for so many years. Oh my God, realized I couldn't write a book, because the way you write for television is completely different from the way you write a book. It was like a huge, steep learning curve, but fantastic, because you put 2-3 years, you realize suddenly 2-3 years, when you literally write every day for 2-3 years, it's like exercising a whole new muscle and learning a whole new skill.
I didn't think I could do that.
Yeah, so it was very, very interesting. So I'm sure today, if I wrote today, with the more writing experience I've had, I could write that book a lot better. But I wrote what I could at the time. But what was very interesting for me was this assumption that I thought, oh yeah, I can do this, and then realizing, wait a minute,
well, I love
can't
the fact
do this.
I love that it's a personal story and it's your personal perspective coming out, because that's really, really amazing. So speaking of all your talents and everything you've done, you have won multiple awards in recognition for all of your amazing work. Tell us about some of those.
So the Ramnath Goenka Award I won twice, and that was for 2 different stories that I'd done. So that's sort of across print and broadcast media.
And that's, I guess, India's equivalent of the Pulitzer.
They say that's how they kind of like present the award, whether it is equivalent to the Pulitzer or not. I don't know. I'm just saying that and there's some fantastic people who won the Environment Award since with Ramnath Goenka. I won it twice for 2 different stories. One was a story I did in Odisha on mining creating massive havoc in elephant corridors in Keonjhar district, and that causing humans and elephants to come into pretty severe conflict. So I did that story in Odisha. And then the other story I did was about a small village in Karnataka called Kokarebelur. It's a small, small village where for generations, the villagers have basically allowed storks and pelicans to come and nest in the trees around the village. And they treat these birds as their daughters, because how they see it is these birds come every year to have their babies just before monsoon in the village. And legend has it that there was some kind of disease outbreak in the village, a couple of 100 years ago, and when the village moved, the birds moved with them. So, it was this lovely little story to do on how people and wildlife can coexist, and how that ethos is a very important thing for all of us to have in our lives, and how it's slowly kind of disappearing. So those were the 2 stories I did. And then I won the Carl Zeiss Award, which is a big international award for reporting on tigers. And so, the thing is, there's some fantastic people doing amazing work out there. So honest to God, winning these awards, it's lovely, of course, but it doesn't make me any better or more special than someone who hasn't won, because you have fantastic people doing incredible work. It just, it comes down to what gets recognized at that time. And it's a very subjective thing. So awards is not like the big thing. It's really, I love just doing what I do. So that's really what drives me. Yeah.
Yeah, I love how how humble you are about all of this and your incredible talents. But that is so wisely said. Thank you for sharing that. So last weekend, I have 2 small kids, as you might remember. We sat down in front of Netflix and we watched The Octopus Teacher, because they're so into that. And oh my goodness, for anyone who hasn't watched it, you've got to see it. It's so powerful. It's so touching. It's in essence really following the story of Craig, your husband, Craig Foster, sort of bonding with this new octopus friend that he meets, and it was absolutely powerful. So tell us a little bit about the Sea Change project and then your brand new documentary on Netflix, The Octopus Teacher.
So Craig established the Sea Change project with a friend, Ross, in 2012. In 2010, he had just come off a year of back-to-back films and deliveries, and it was a lot. So, you know, he was quite run down and burnt out and just struggling with a lot of things and not feeling connected to nature, and, you know, some low-grade depression, however you want to maybe kind of classify that, but he was going through that. And at that time, because he felt that deep disconnect from nature, he really wanted to get back to that. And if you see in the movie, he talks about how he'd been inspired from the time he'd spent with the sun trackers in the Kalahari ages ago when he'd made another movie. And he sort of just decided that he was going to put his camera down, not make another film, and actually just spend time in nature. And that's how he started diving every day and going into this ecosystem every day. And through that process of diving every day and going into the ecosystem every day, realized that this extraordinary ecosystem was here, and it had this unbelievable biodiversity, and it had this wonderful, way of systems of functioning. And then he started studying that, and he started studying under Professor Charles Griffiths, who's an absolute doyen of this ecosystem. And he was helped by other scientists and started discovering like new behaviors and new species that no one had ever seen before in this environment, simply because he was going in every day. And he started recording all of that with his camera. And it so happened he met this young octopus who was curious enough to sort of accept him in her space, and not just accept him in her space, but to allow him to be in her space for almost a year, where he could very, very closely document everything with her life. But it ended up that her life taught him more than he thought he'd ever learn or see, and not just what he documented, but just what it meant for his own life and well-being. And it was an extraordinary process. And it was all done with absolutely no intention that it would become a movie, because how are you to predict that an animal would even stay with you for a year, right? There's no way to know that. It's a wild animal. So he was just recording what he saw and what he experienced. And then when we realized what we had in terms of the material, and Pippa came on board, the director, Pippa Ehrlich came on board with her vision and eye. They crafted the story, and then that's how the film came into being. But it's a personal journey, and it was right here on our doorstep. And so we were all made. So the Sea Change team was involved in helping produce it. And so Sea Change Project, we're a group of 7 individuals right now, like-minded individuals. We're all in the ocean every day. We all skin dive, which means no wetsuits, no scuba gear, none of all that. It's essentially, we're trying to get back to that deep nature immersion, bringing back that connection and that joy that nature can bring in your life. And what we're trying to do is really, we are trying to tell stories and produce videos, and just so we can share the joy we feel and how special we feel that this ecosystem is really with the rest of the world. So our sort of mission, I would say, is to make this great African sea forest, which is our kelp forest here on the shores of South Africa really, into a global icon, to make people respond to it and recognize it just like they do. For example, if I said Masai Mara, most people would know immediately what I'm talking about. If I said Serengeti, most people would know immediately what I'm talking about. If I said the Great Barrier Reef, again, people would recognize it. But if I say kelp forest, most people don't know what a kelp forest is. They don't understand there's this gigantic floating forest under the water, covers 1/4 of the planet's coastline. It's a massive marine algae plant. It's a marine algae plant. Marine algae, as marine algae in the ocean produces 70% of the world's oxygen. So which means every second breath you are taking and I am taking, even if we live in landlocked countries, every second breath we take comes from the ocean thanks to the phytoplankton, which is a marine algae. So kelp is part of the marine algal plant system. It covers 1/4 of the world's coastline. our kelp forest, we've named it the Great African Sea Forest to give her an identity. So, you know, people start to recognize it. So that's really what Sea Change is trying to do in a big way, is work towards this, the conservation of the Great African Sea Forest.
Amazing. That is extraordinary, and what an astounding journey you just described. That's amazing. Thank you so much. So obviously, being a woman in quite a traditionally male-dominated field, it must have been tough at times. Are there any challenges that you could kind of walk us through that you might have encountered in your kind of experiences?
So again, in terms of personal challenges, it was more physical challenges and perception challenges. So, you know, when you say you want to go do wildlife filming, or you want to go into a wild area or to a wild place, and you're just, you know, there's just you and two other women who are your crew, a lot, especially in India, a lot of people are like, aren't you scared, or aren't you worried, or what about safety, or how can you go on your own, or these are very, very remote places, and in many places there's no electricity, you can't use there's no phone signal, there's nothing, you just go there, you finish your work and you come back. So a lot of people are like, you know, how unsafe is this, and you know, you're a woman. And I was like, you never ask them, you know, so the men never get asked this, male crews, they never get asked this. The women get asked it all the time. I understand the reality of why we get asked it, because we live, unfortunately, in incredibly patriarchal culture that perpetuates tremendous violence against women. So, you know, I understand the context in which this gets asked, but it has never stopped me from doing what I've had to do. One is careful, of course. One isn't silly. You never know what can happen in a particular area, but I've been very blessed that it's all been great. And to be very honest, actually, in most of those places, which is very much in the heart of the most remote and rural parts of India, you meet the kindest people. So it's really quite a weird fallacy that everyone thinks, oh, you're going to this remote area and it's so dangerous, when actually taking a walk in Delhi or, you know, Bangalore is far more dangerous, from sexual harassment to being groped or having people say stuff to you or whatever it is. You know, I find that a lot more dangerous. So that was quite interesting. The other perception, I was very lucky that it broke for me early, was when I did my master's in communication at the Jamia University, at the Mass Communication Research Center at Jamia University, MCRC as it was called. I had fantastic professors, women professors, who were camera people, who were editors, who were directors, filmmakers. And when they started class and they started teaching us about all of this, basically said, you have to be gender blind. Anyone can do this. This is just film. Don't let people tell you women aren't good at, you know, don't fall into that trap that technology, you know, this attitude that women aren't good with technology. Nonsense, right? It just comes down to, have you used it or have you not used it? Has someone taught you to use it? Or
and you had an entire crew. You had an entire crew of women only. So there you go. You know?
Exactly. You know, so they were so when I went to university, they were very, very clear that don't be that girl. You know, don't be that girl who's like, oh, I don't know how to do this, or oh, this is too heavy for me to lift, or oh, I can't, like, don't be that girl. In this, you know, just be gender blind for yourself. I'm not saying there aren't certain situations where, as a woman, you have to be more aware of the fact that you're a woman, but it shouldn't impede your skill level or what you can contribute to that situation, or the capacities that you have, or the skills that you personally may bring. You know, so all of that. So all of these things are very, very important, because I think there's a lot of unconscious bias. We don't realize it, but if we've grown up in societies where somewhere along the line, the message that's filtered down, even indirectly, is as a woman, how you're supposed to behave, or how you're supposed to comport yourself, or what your capabilities are or are not. Even if you haven't particularly been brought up in a household where patriarchy was overt, or where you were told how to behave as a woman. I was very lucky that I grew up in a household where my parents, again, because of Krishnamurti philosophy and all of that, were completely different thinkers. And, you know, I was brought up in a very gender blind household, but you still have to live in this society. And there's a lot of that stuff that, you know, you could have filtered through and have unconscious bias yourself as a woman. Because, you know, that whole thing, you see it in the US as well, where there's this whole thing about how STEM is not something that women do much of, like so math and chemistry and physics and biology. So science really seen as a male domain, you know. Computers again seen as a male domain. You know, this kind of nonsense. And in media, it's rampant, especially when a lot of my friends very specifically became camera women. They were like, why are you calling us camera women? We're camera persons. We're camera persons.
Exactly.
That's it, right? No cameraman, camera women. And I remember, especially when NDTV started, we were one of the first private channel. We were the first private channel in the country. And most of our, we had a lot of camera persons who were women. And so in the field, a lot of people would be like, oh, you know, how are you managing? Or, you know, how can you do this? Or even be taunted about, you know, how will you ever go get hard news? Because, you know, you have 10 people with a camera jostling, trying to get a shot. How are you going to do it as a woman?
Absolutely,
and attitudes like that, right? And you also got attitudes like, so when I've traveled, it's really not been in the place, of course, in some of the places where I go, you know, a lot of the times it was sweet though. A lot of the local people would be like, so are you married? And how are you traveling on your own? And where's your husband? Or where's your father? You know, so you just have to be polite and get on with it because you have to do what you do. So, but in terms of overt sexual harassment or really being put down for being a woman or anything like that, I've been very lucky not to have faced. A lot of my friends have. I've just been very lucky because NDTV from the beginning, from the get-go, was very, very clear that that just would not fly. In fact, our PCR crews, our technical crews, most of them are women in my organization.
I love that.
So, you know, so it's both Prannoy and Radhika very, very firm on this. So I was very lucky that I didn't have that. But yeah, you can't get away from it from larger society.
Yeah, no, totally. And thank you so much for sharing that. And I think those are really, really great sort of lasting words that we heard from you, like, you know, be gender blind, that resilience, and sort of think about your passion and why you're doing this in the first place. And that is what drives you through. Don't think about, you know, you hear things that society says, you hear things about what is going on. Get on with your job and do it and be the best you can. Exactly. So Swati, I wanted to thank you so much for sharing your incredible journey with us today. Swati Thiyagarajan, conservation journalist, author, filmmaker, and storyteller. And thank you to our viewers for joining us on this empowerment journey. We want you all to embrace that inner goddess of go-getting. We want you to be bold, be you, be Uma.